My trend analysis was on the decline of American space exploration. And this stemmed from a National Geographic article I read by David Dobbs. He found that there's a correlation between a gene DRD4-7R, which is a dopamine receptor, and our innate curiosity or the human need to explore. Basically, he found that in migratory cultures, this gene is more prevalent. And going even further than that, those with more repetitions of this gene in their DNA tended to be more successful and more well fed than their peers. And on the flip side, in sedentary cultures, those with more repetitions of this gene tended to be less well off than their peers and less affluent. So this ties into uh, America in a way that because as a country, we can all claim, as citizens of the United States, we can pretty much all claim descendancy from an explorer, from an immigrant, from someone who wanted a new life. And it's interesting to see that because while our exploration, our innate curiosity can be seen in this American dream, it's not pretty much seen in our exploration of space anymore. And we can see this because we're relying on Russia to get into space now, a pretty much hostile government. So basically, NASA's Office of Inspector General estimates that in 2018 we're going to be paying $81 million per person to send an astronaut into space on a Russian rocket because Russia is the only country capable of getting someone to the International Space Station and back right now. And that's because NASA has failed to provide a replacement for the space shuttle. It's been nearly a decade since the last shuttle was retired and we don't have anything to show for it. And there's a plethora of reasons for this. First of all, it's easy to see that NASA's been receiving less and less funding. It peaked during the Apollo programs and it's been declining ever since. Additionally, there's the politics parts. First of all, there's increased partisanship. As Neil deGrasse Tyson found out, the arguments Democrats used against George W. Bush during his presidency became the arguments Republicans used against President Obama during his presidency, which showed that the arguments weren't about the space policy at all. It was just political ammunition to use against those respective presidents. And additionally, those presidents are harming NASA as well. The changes in leadership at the executive branch cost NASA a lot of money. For example, when George Bush was in office, he had a plan called the Constellation Project, where we would go back to the moon and eventually get to Mars. When Obama stepped in, he immediately canceled that plan. $9 billion down the drain. So, this changes in leadership ultimately hurt NASA's ability to make decisions and to invest wisely in certain projects. Now, going off of that results in cancellations, and these cancellations of projects mean people leave. Most notably, after the space shuttle the space shuttle program was canceled, um, NASA experienced a brain drain, or their top talent began leaving the agency for more lucrative, more high-profile jobs in companies like SpaceX or Boeing. So, without this talent, NASA loses pretty much unquantifiable amounts of research, R&D, and innovation. And overall, that results in lower quality of work. And the effects of that could be seen in the 80s and 90s, where this B team effect cost NASA millions of dollars in satellites and rockets. Now, the overarching problem that plagues space exploration, the reason why politicians no longer really can invest in space or support space anymore is that we've shifted towards an impulse culture, high maximum returns in the shortest amount of time. And that basically means, in terms of politics, that the most you can do during your term to get reelected is what you're going to do. You're not going to invest in space because space never guarantees a return on your investment. So, as outlined by Paul Roberts in his book, aptly called The Impulse Culture, uh, space isn't worth supporting anymore in today's society. Now, the effects of this are numerous. First of all, there's going to be a decreased interest in scientific education. According to Markovich for the Council on Foreign Relations, the percentage of bachelor degrees in science and engineering peaked in 1966 during the Apollo programs and has been steadily decreasing ever since, showing a correlation between high-profile space missions and education. And the effect of that is if we continue to let this interest decline, future generations are going to be under-equipped to tackle problems like climate change or environmental sustainability. Now, additionally, not only does education stand to lose, but the private industry does as well. Government contracts make up about 13% of the entire aerospace industry. So if NASA continues to receive less funding, private industries will lose money. But secondly, they're also going to lose out on innovation because, as Frost outlines, Forbes, he was also a former employee at NASA. He explains that private innovation requires um, uh, the public to subsidize them for taking risks. If NASA doesn't pay them to take risks in their innovation, they won't innovate, right? This artificial market created by buying spaceship parts will cease to exist, and the innovation that comes with that will cease to exist because then these companies will simply only use the rockets they know will work to launch the satellites with telecom companies and such. They won't innovate because they don't need to do anything different. Now, finally, the last effect is that we're going to lose out on international cooperation. Markovich mentions that once again, the International Space Station is the result of 14 different countries working together. And if we let NASA continue to decline, we're going to lose out on a valuable way to communicate with other countries. And especially during a time where Twitter is considered a communication line between our president and the rest of the world, any chance we have for international cooperation must be taken advantage of, and space is one of those opportunities. Now, to solve for this, Neil deGrasse Tyson joked that if we just waited for China to release plans for a secret military base on Mars, that the U.S. would be there in 2 years. If we could simply just wait and let another country eclipse us in technology and try to play catch up. But if we truly want to make a lasting change, we have to attack this impulse culture that Roberts mentioned earlier. And we have to convince ourselves that deferring gratification and investing in long-term projects is beneficial. We have to be reminded that investing in science and scientific projects simply for the sake of science is worth investing in, and that this cycle of immediate returns is unsustainable in the long run. So, in order for NASA to succeed, we have to have another culture change. We have to remember that science is worth investing in. Right? Thank you.